they may see someone changing, which would be awful.
Horrific.
Wouldn't it?
Would be horrific.
Grotesque.
A lot of people are watching you, and there's no modesty thong in sight.
Hello and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Luke Plimmer.
And I'm Laura East.
Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves and the times when they've died on stage. Our backstage pass holder John O'Neill also takes a look behind the scenes at the Crescent Theatre Birmingham to discover more about what goes into making a great amateur production.
Today's episode explores keeping it simple on stage when producing plays that are written to be performed with minimal set and costume. Plays where the words, characters and ideas create the drama and the world of the play without lavish backdrops or fancy frocks. We'll be interviewing Fee Cotton, actor and director, to find out about her life and loves in amateur theatre and her experience of directing plays that keep the staging simple whilst also experimenting with form. This month, John will be going behind the scenes on the Crescent Theatre's forthcoming Studio Fortnight productions of A Number by Caryl Churchill and Swallow by Stef Smith.
Now we're really delighted to welcome Fee Cotton onto the podcast, who is directing the Crescent Theatre's upcoming production of A Number by Caryl Churchill. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Fee.
Thank you for having me, Luke.
So, as I say, you're directing Caryl Churchill's play A Number. What drew you to that originally?
The writing. Caryl Churchill is just, I think, Britain's best playwright, living playwright. She writes about unusual subjects and she presents them in really unusual ways. She's fresh, she's dynamic, the writing's muscular, incredibly difficult to learn for the actors, but so I was drawn to her because I'm a feminist. I've just done Maryland. I'm really interested in women in theatre, women writers, women actors, and so it seemed an ideal choice. And it's a two-hander, which I rather mistakenly thought as a newish director, that'll be easy. Well, actually it has its own challenges, doesn't it, directing small casts, but it's a real honour to do it. And to answer your second question, what's it about? Well, it's on one level, it's set in the context of a future world. Well, it was written in 2002, so it could be now, really, where the cloning of human beings is a commodity that people can buy. So there is a theme about, Caryl Churchill writes about capitalism quite a lot. So there's a kind of theme there about that. There's a bigger theme about what it means to be copied, to be a copy. And there are lots of moral, philosophical themes around what is the essence of a human being. But then, so in some ways when you're watching it, it's a bit like watching a moral debate. And then at other times, it's like watching EastEnders, an incredibly gripping family drama with moments of intense love and betrayal and passion and humour. It's a family drama, essentially. And then on another level, it's a bit like a horror thriller. So it's all of those things. Nice. Yeah, which makes it extremely interesting to direct.
So the Crescent is currently producing A Number to be performed in rotation with Swallow by Stef Smith as part of Studio Fortnight. The premise of Studio Fortnight is to present two stripped-back studio plays in a black box staging without any built set. Costume is fairly simple, and there are no props, the idea being to bring the power of the playwright's ideas and language to the fore. What do you love about simple, inventive theatre like this?
Well, when the writing is as crystal sharp as Caryl Churchill's, you don't really need anything else very much. I was lucky enough to go and see some of her most recent work at the Royal Court, and they presented it in a really interesting way with a really stripped back set, but with weird sort of acrobatics in between each act, which was rather strange. But it gives you the opportunity to heighten the meaning of everything that appears on that set, whether it's a hand gesture, raised eyebrow, an empty place at a small table, everything takes on much more significance, and it becomes, in a way, more challenging for the audience, but more liberating as well, because you can just imagine this scenario that's taking place in front of your eyes in any kind of setting that you might want to impose on it as an observer. And it's challenging as well, because it takes away some of the usual markers that we might have about where's the door, where, you know, when is this happening, who are we, where are we, how long is this all taking? But it for postmodern plays like Swallow and A Number, to take that away puts the audience right in the heart of the big questions that the plays ask, I think.
Great. So what's been the love of your theatrical life?
Well, it's hard to pick one particular show, but I think for various reasons, I'd have to pick Cabaret, which was a show that I was, again, in the right place at the right time. I joined the theatre and came to have a look around the theatre one night when they were auditioning for Pride and Prejudice. And I just thought everyone got auditioned at the end of their little look around the theatre. But I got a phone call a couple of days later to say, we'd like to offer you the part of Lydia. So I was straight in. And then while I was in that, everyone was talking about Cabaret, who's going to be in Cabaret? It's going to be amazing. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I'm not a particularly good singer, but I could dance, I could learn lines. And Alan Marshall believed in me and cast me as Sally Bowles. Andrew Cowie, who is in my cast for A Number, was Cliff. So you can imagine me, you know, not maybe barely 5 feet tall, and Andrew. So we made quite an interesting pair. But to come into the family of the theatre through those two productions, with the Crescent royalty of Ron Barber and Brenda doing Pride and Prejudice, and then Alan and Jen and all of their team doing Cabaret, I just really got immersed in the life of this theatre through those two shows, but Cabaret in particular, because everyone was involved in it. Huge show, and I learnt so much about, obviously, the context and content of that play, but about the way the theatre worked, about what goes into putting on a piece of musical theatre, about how long a tech can last. And I think that show is the big standout one for me, because it was such an amazing opportunity, and I just made so many wonderful friends that are still friends now. So, yeah. Can I say something else, though, about my love in theatre?
Go for it.
Another thing that's been a love of theatre for me has been introducing my daughters to theatre. And as I said, my parents gave me as many opportunities as they could, living where we did. But I'm lucky enough to be in a different position. We live in Birmingham. We can get a train to London. And, you know, seeing them experience and develop a love for writing, for creativity, for theatre and performance has just been really wonderful to see. And, you know, we've now experienced a lot of new things together. We love the Almeida Theatre. That's our sort of, whatever's on at the Almeida, we'll go and see. And seeing that baton passed on, it's a bit like Hector says, isn't it, in the History Boys? Pass it on, boys, pass it on. And there's a bit of a sense of that, I think, for us as parents, but also people of my age in the theatre who, you know, I know Liz has welcomed people into Swallow to watch the directing process from the youth theatre, and we had some people from youth theatre in Maryland, and passing that on to the next generation is, and learning from the next generation, letting them lead us a bit as well, is a really important part of my love of what theatre is.
Tell us about the one that got away.
Oh, well, I'm hoping that this one hasn't really got away, but I'm not sure. There's a part that I would love to play, and it's Rose in Gypsy. I just saw it on Netflix. It's come on, hasn't it, to Netflix, Gypsy. And I was in that play. I played Tessie Tura, the Texas twirler, and Joe Thackeray played Rose. And it's such an amazing part. It's interesting because I'm not really a big fan of musical theatre. And I've talked here today, haven't I, about cabaret and about, Gypsy. They are, to be in those shows is amazing. And I think that part is, for an older woman, is such an amazing, there's such an amazing range. The comedy, I'd love to do more comedy. But I'd like to still sing and dance into my late 50s and 60s. Maybe that's a bit old for Rose, but I think it is the one that got away, because I don't think I'll ever get a chance to do that. And I probably couldn't learn the lines now anyway. And I certainly couldn't get my leg up as high as it probably needs to go. Yes, so let's say that's the one that has got away. I'll give up on it officially in this podcast.
Never say never. So tell us about a time when you died on stage.
Oh, gosh. Well, I took quite a big gap in my time at the Crescent Theatre. So I went from playing lots of sort of Juve leads to then playing an old friar. So I've never had to die, metaphorically, literally, on stage, because I've always played quite young characters. But I have died on stage quite a lot, in the sense of being in that awful, blood-curdling moment of thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? And one was a costume malfunction. I was in a play called Nasty Neighbours, and a few years ago, I don't know when they stopped doing this, but BT used to sponsor a play for all the little theatres in Britain to do. And so in October, all the little theatres in Britain who signed up to this scheme would perform the same play. And I was in it one year. Michael Barry directed it. It was called Nasty Neighbours, and it was written by Deborah Isett, who wrote Nativity and Coventry-based, sort of Belgrade theatre-based playwright. And it's a really, really well-written play. And it's about three couples. Two couples live next door to each other in a really, really boring cul-de-sac. One couple are really boring. The other couple, me and Paul Spilsbury, are new and a bit anarchic. And then there's another couple who sit slightly off stage, who've emigrated from the house that the new couple live in to Australia. So they're sitting on a nice balcony, enjoying a new life. And it's sort of about the interplay between the lives of these three couples. So my character, can't even remember her name, I think it might have been Lisa. She's desperate to get pregnant. So her and her husband are very actively involved in making that happen a lot of the time at high decibel value. So there's quite a lot of costume issues with that, because the characters have to take off a lot of clothes all the time. And there was one scene where I had to do a kind of Christine Keeler over the back of a chair, but facing the back of the stage. So I basically had to straddle a chair. And I had on a sort of loose pyjama top, and my husband had to pull down these little flimsy knickers that I was wearing. So the costume solution to this was, the wonderful Paul Spilsbury said, I'm going to make you a modesty thong. The modesty thong went on. Then the little cami knickers went over the top, and all was well, because when the knickers came down, all was safely gathered in. So at the dress rehearsal, a lot of people came to watch the dress rehearsal, and they were all sitting on the front row. Thank God it wasn't in an actual performance, because this is what dress rehearsals are for, isn't it? As I straddled Paul, who was sitting on the chair, and got my line out, and then I thought, oh my God, I didn't put this whole costume on. So as Paul was reaching for the little floaty knickers, I was whispering in his ear, I haven't got the modesty thong on. There's no modesty thong. He was trying not to laugh and quickly thinking, what the hell shall I do so I don't expose Fee's arse to the world? Did something nifty with the pyjama top and all was well. But yeah, that awful moment. It's like a nightmare, isn't it? The nightmare where you're naked in front of a lot of people. And you know, all of the nightmares. You don't know your lines, you're naked, a lot of people are watching you, and there's no modesty thong in sight. So that was one. I mean, I've seen some amazing deaths on stage as part of that little Theatre Guild of Great Britain thing that we got involved in through Nasty Neighbours. I was chosen to be a rep for this theatre to go to a conference.
Do you think it was that dress rehearsal moment that made them decide that should be the case?
Put her out on tour. So we saw a play called The Roses of Eyam, and a lot of people had to die. At the beginning of one act, there were a lot of people on stage sitting on chairs, and they all died, and they all fell on the floor. But the director hadn't thought about how they were going to get them off, and these people were scooting themselves off with their feet, sort of semi-deaths. That was quite funny. On a serious level, though, when I was in Romeo and Juliet has to, obviously, not to die, but appear dead. And it was amazing to see the actor who played Juliet do that on stage, because she had to lie under a white sheet really still for a long time. And it's claustrophobic, you know, and you're lying there knowing that maybe 300 people are watching you and you can't move, and there's a lot of acting involved in being dead, isn't there? And it made me think, God, that's really, really hard to do.
Fee, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think it's fair to say that this edition has been pretty special, I think, in all seriousness. So thank you so much for coming on and answering our questions. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And now it's time to hear from our roving reporter, John O'Neill. John's been backstage in the Crescent. Where are you, John?
I'm currently in a theatre control room. Messing with equipment, I really shouldn't be. It looks expensive and complicated. I might get myself into trouble here, but I just want to know what all these sliders, dials and flashing lights do. Joe! Joe, perfect timing. I don't suppose you've got a few minutes to guide me and our listeners through theatrical sound design? Just to set the scene for our listeners, Joe, there's plenty of sound equipment squirreled away in the performance spaces here at the Crescent Theatre. Mm-hmm. Can you please take us on the journey the sound wave takes from storage medium to the audience's ear?
Yeah. Obviously, you've got your source of your sound. You ask about storage medium. Obviously, these days we're into the world of computers and all of that, aren't we? As opposed to the old world when it was all on tape and vinyl and so on. So, yes, storage mediums, files. The main file type is a WAV file.
Right.
So when you're talking about...
And that's a WAV WAV file.
Yeah, .wav.
Right.
It's all very interesting. You've got .mp3, which most people will know about MP3s, but that's a compressed audio file, so the audio quality isn't as good as your WAV file,
right,
which is uncompressed.
Yeah.
The highest quality that you could probably get.
Right.
And so, yeah, but the knock-on for that is that... the file size is quite large, which is why you get MP3s, because you can actually have them a smaller file size.
What does it go through? What's the next chain in the link in the chain?
Well, I mean, you know, it'll just sit there doing nothing until you actually start editing. So I'll use editing software to create the particular sound effect that I require. all with the view ultimately that this is going to end up in some form, some version of playback software, Q software. Right. We use ShowQ system here because we're a Windows-based theatre. Right. There are other Q softwares available, and you ultimately end up with a Q stack of all your sound effects or music files in the prescribed order that you need for the show. But before it gets to that point, you've got to, if it requires it, edit it all together, and I'll do that in a multi-track digital audio workstation, and just, depending on the complexity, you can then layer the sounds according to how you need, what your ultimate, what the sound effect that you need to create. I mean, it may not need any layering at all. It may just be a single sound, something very simple and basic. A telephone rings, you need a telephone. You're not going to start layering that. But if it's something where the script requires something more of a soundscape, or you need to create an ambience, an environment that you can't necessarily go and record, you might want to be able to look at the layers of sounds that I've got in my sound library and create that atmosphere from a composite of lots of individual sounds.
Wow. What equipment do you then use to get that to move off the sound stack and into the auditorium?
The PC, which is where your Q software will be hooked up to the mixer.
Right, and shall we go and look at the mixer?
Let's go and have a look at that.
So we've just walked into Main House Auditorium here at the Crescent Theatre, which is ready for the opening night of the Lovely Bones tonight. So here we are. This is the sound desk. It's how wide would you say? About 1 metre wide. It's got about, 25, 30 sliders on it. Lots of. Take us through it, Joe. There's lots of complex stuff.
Yes, there is, and it can be daunting. It's a digital mixer, so there's a lot of pages and menus, and there's a touch screen to access various controls. So it looks like, how do I do that? But basically, the mixer is the heart of the system, because all your sources go through that. You mix, you balance those levels.
So you can literally put sound anywhere in the auditorium if you choose to, in terms of where the direction of the sound's coming from. But there's other equipment here to the left of the desk. There's like a rack of IT equipment, dark boxes. What's in those dark boxes?
Those dark boxes, they're dimly lit, aren't they? That's our main house sound computer in there.
Right.
The software will be on there. Then we've got an audio interface connected to that computer, and we send all our signal to the back of the desk, physically into this back of the desk here, onto independent channels. We mix that.
And the channels are like the volumes of each sound effect.
So in a nutshell, without wanting to get too in-depth about it, because it can be quite an extensive subject to understand how a mixer works. It's, you put your signal in, send it through the desk, get the signal out, and send it to an amplifier and then a speaker.
Okay, so we're back in the control room here now, and we're stood in front of a stack of equipment which is taller than I am. And so take us through this, Joe.
This is our amplifier rack here. So these boxes here are our amps, and we can patch mixer outputs on this patch bay into the amplifier inputs here. So all these little cords here, which I'm not going to touch with, just mess with now, because that's set up for today's show.
So just to describe this to the listeners, the patches, when we say patch, there must be 300 like microphone jacks or headphone jacks, they look like, don't they? All in rows, and each one of those corresponds to a channel from somewhere.
It's called the patch bay because then you can put a patch cord in, which uses GPO jacks, not the more modern quarter-inch jacks.
Right.
GPO. They were used in the telephone exchanges back in the day. So these then you would take a desk output and plug it into an amp input.
Right.
And then on this amplifier and speaker patch bay down here, you would take the amp output to the designated speaker location around the building. And I can see a question that you asked earlier is how many we've got in this venue, and I can see we've got 30 here.
So there's 30 different ports for speakers in the performance space. So there's 30 different places that speakers can be placed. Fantastic. Right, so we've channeled our sound from the PC through the mixing desk, from the mixing desk to the first patch, from the first patch to the amplifier, from the amplifier down to the speaker ports. Where's the next stop in the sound wave?
The stage.
Right, let's go to the stage. Where are we now? What are we looking at?
We're looking at the front of house PA speakers. So this is our main PA, which comprises those two. We've got two full range speakers either side at height, and a subwoofer down here. So that handles all the low
end, the
low end
sound.
Yeah, and that's filtered out, so the lows just go to that speaker.
Right.
And above, anything above that sort of crossover frequency comes out through the full range speakers that are rigged at height there.
Excellent. And that's the end of the sound waves journey, I guess?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can place, obviously on this set, I can't see them, but I know Kevin has spent some time placing speakers in various places, so they will be tucked away discreetly, so they can't be seen. Can't wait to hear what he's done.
So, Joe, you're currently busy designing the sound for an upcoming Studio Fortnight here at the Crescent Theatre. On alternate nights from the 19th of Feb to the 5th of March, we'll be staging both Caryl Churchill's A Number and Stef Smith's Swallow. Both of these plays are relatively new. Swallow premiered as recently as 2015 at the Traverse Theatre in Edinburgh, whilst A Number was first staged in 2002 at the Royal Court Theatre in London, starring none other than Daniel Craig and Michael Gambon. What both plays have in common are their small casts and experimental styles. The conventional storyline is rejected. There are no stage directions in the scripts, which leaves the producing company to devise all the movement and any sense of place. The production team and cast must flesh out the scripted dialogue with the direction of their own making. Equally, the audience must piece together the world of the plays, connecting up thoughts, fragments of narrative and possible interrelations. The journey is like watching a fuzzy TV gradually coming into focus. How involved have you been in the production process for these two plays so far, and what creative decisions have been made and what is left to do?
There's a lot left to do from my point of view. No, it's fine. I've received some notes from both directors, so all directors work in a slightly different way, I suppose, but principally they would send, by and large, they all will send their design team notes on what they require. So specifically for sound, I've received notes from both directors about the sound that they require for this production. And I think it's unique in the fact that it's, both, as you described, bereft of any real stage direction, and they can take it, the directors can take it where they would like to go. So that's where you kind of just try and translate those kind of notes that you receive into selecting the right tools for the editing job. And so there's various sort of effects processors and they're all sort of PC based. They're all virtual these days. I haven't actually got physical effects processors anymore. They're known as plugins or VST effects. And I'll use those in my multi-track editor to create some hopefully interesting sounds. I haven't got a clue what it will sound like, which is great, because this is the exciting time when you just have got, I don't know quite what the finished outcome is going to be, but then that's part of the joy of what we do, is because it is that discovery.
Yeah.
And as much as the people on stage are converting taking the script writer's vision and putting it and giving it life there. You know, our job principally is to support that story with the best use of sound, and sometimes that requires very little sound at all, which is fine. It's an exciting time, and I can't wait to hear what it sounds like. I haven't got a clue at the moment.
Yeah, so this is the creative space time for you, I guess. And with these particular 2 plays, because they are unusual, you're going to have more license than you would in other more prescribed plays, I suppose, to make an unusual and original soundscape, which I imagine, from a sound designer's point of view, is both terrifying and exciting at the same time.
Yes, and there won't be a lot. It's not wall-to-wall sound by any means. There's just a couple of moments in Swallow where it requires something, quite interesting from a design point of view. The director Liz wants a cacophony of sounds, of previously used sounds, to be layered together and played backwards and delayed and echoed and all that kind of thing. So that's time to just just play around and just have some fun with it, and be surprised by what comes out at the end. So hopefully it'll be all right.
Excellent. So, how did you get involved with sound design, and what would you say to any budding sound designers out there, or maybe even listening into this podcast right now?
Right. How did I start? Music was the sort of the starting point for that. Back in the late 90s, which shows how old I am, I did some music for a video game with my good friend John Saul, and we would write music together just as a hobby, as well as much as anything else. And then years later, he was working for an animation studio, and they needed a sound designer. So I could translate my skills in music production into sound design, because you use the same software essentially, and you're using the same sort of basic toolkit in order to create sound design as much as produce music. So I got a job there with that studio and did sound design on a few different children's TV shows, which didn't necessarily set the world on fire, but it was good experience nonetheless.
And those were professional TV shows?
Yes.
And so did you just apply for that work and then just got the commission to do it? Or?
It was, those, I mean, in terms of, getting into that, it was very much being in the right place at the right time. Right. And that was sort of that conversation I had with my friend, and they needed a sound designer. So I didn't apply for the job as such. It wasn't posted anywhere. It was one of those conversations that you just grew into, okay, I'm here at the right time for this. The programmes themselves weren't commissioned. They were privately financed kind of programmes. Okay. And then we just sold them to broadcasters. Fortunately, they did get broadcast, but they didn't, as I say, set the world on fire or anything like that. But it was good experience to sort of progress my own skills as a sound designer, and additionally a video editor, and did a bit of script writing as well. And then I moved out of the world of sort of TV work and transitioned into theatre. That was sort of about 6 years ago, and fell in love with live theatre really, and started volunteering at another theatre, and then because I don't live in Birmingham, but I've started working here now. But at my theatre in my hometown, it's all volunteer run, much like the Crescent is. And so when I started working here, I got involved with the membership and working on shows here. So yes, that's my sort of journey so far, really.
So you've learnt by doing, really.
Absolutely, that's the only way to, and making plenty of mistakes along the way, because that's really another part of the learning process. So that's what I would say to the budding sound designers or other people out there is, be comfortable with making mistakes and don't be afraid to, because that's how you learn. Yeah. And I make them all the time. Yeah. You know, and it's okay.
Just start doing.
Yeah, it's okay to not, and it's okay to make the mistakes, and sometimes you get happy accidents as well. So do that, make a few mistakes, and try to approach each new project with a clean slate and a clean mind. Because I find if you come with a preconceived idea of what it's going to be like, then all of a sudden what you create starts to sound a bit rinse and repeat. Right. Like you've done it before, dull, tired, repetitive. So when I say things like earlier that I've got no idea what it's going to sound like, I genuinely don't really, you know, because otherwise, you know, it's just repeating old ideas, which isn't fresh.
So always start with the blank canvas.
Always start with
and
the blank
don't worry
canvas.
that you don't know it all, because nobody knows it all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Finally, regular listeners of the Amateur of Life and Death podcast will know that we like to raise the decibels in each episode by deploying the deafening power of trivia. This episode is no exception. So, may I introduce to you or good to go.
Okay.
The technical rehearsal. It don't sound too exciting.
Okay, sorry. Yay!
The technical rehearsal is a crucial part of preparing any production for the stage. It's the time when everyone focuses on getting the technical elements of the show right. That's the sound, costume, lighting, special effects, etc. It's also a time when you will hear an abundance of theatrical jargon and technical terms that can be baffling to the uninitiated and even the partly initiated. Joe, I'm going to say some sentences. Can you tell me if that would be an uh-oh moment or a good to go moment, and explain why?
Okay.
The actors can't see the spikes in this state. Is that uh-oh or good to go?
Uh-oh.
And why is that an uh-oh? The actors can't see the spikes.
Spikes are on the stage. So there's marks upon the stage called spikes.
Right.
And actors may have a spike that they need to go to.
Got you.
To be in a certain position so that when a lighting cue comes up, they're nicely lit.
Right. And if they stand in the wrong place, the light will come up and they'll be.
Yeah, we may just see them shoulders down and miss the head. And all actors are want to be seen, don't they? So it's good for them to be on their mark, on their spike.
The mark is the spike.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Number 2. The wings are masked off.
Good to go.
And why is that good to go?
Because who wants to see the wings from an audience perspective?
Right.
Yeah. So the wings are masked off. So
can we start with what are the wings?
No, the wings are at the side, backstage, of on either side of the stage, and that's where actors enter and exit the stage from,
right.
And all kinds of scenery that comes on and off. So you can see all the backstage stuff if the wings aren't masked off properly.
Right.
If you're in the audience.
So sight lines into the backstage.
Yeah.
And it ruins everything for them.
Yeah. They may see someone changing, which would be awful.
Horrific.
Wouldn't it?
Would be horrific.
Grotesque.
Number 3. The lead is on book for the final scene.
Uh-oh.
And why is that an uh-oh?
Because the lead hasn't learnt their lines.
Okay.
If they're on book for the final scene. Have I
no, you're
given
right.
you the right
you're
answer
right.
to that?
Yeah. So on book, if we were
on
to
book,
explain what that means.
Is the script. Directors love actors to be off book as quickly as possible, which means they've learnt their lines.
They're no longer physically holding
the book. It's out of their hands.
Yeah, it's gone.
But if they're on book, then the actor hasn't done their job. So yes, if they're on book,
they're holding the script. Joe, that has been so interesting to learn about the sound, and I'm a bit of a techie geek at heart, so to go and see all that equipment and all those ports and all of that stuff has been absolutely fascinating and wonderful.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Joe.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
The play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king.
So says the eponymous hero in Act 2, Scene 2 of Hamlet. It's a phrase that's entered our language and it's the title of this month's podcast. On one level, Hamlet is talking about his plan to have a play enacted at court before his uncle, Claudius, that he thinks will touch Claudius's guilty conscience about the murder of Hamlet's father. Hamlet hopes that his uncle's reaction to the carefully crafted drama will betray him and that the performance will confirm Hamlet's suspicions. On another level, we can interpret the line as Shakespeare himself saying something about the role of the playwright. In Shakespeare's day, plays were produced for the monarch, and playwrights were sponsored by royalty and other wealthy patrons. A playwright could seek to guide and instruct the king or queen of the day, albeit indirectly, through their plays. Maybe Shakespeare was highlighting the moral and social responsibility of the dramatist to highlight important issues to those who had the power to address them. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys wrote about seeing around 350 plays and gave some pretty robust critiques of a lot of them. He seemed to actively dislike so many plays that you start to wonder why he kept going back to the theatre, but then of course there was no Netflix in the 17th century. He wasn't a big fan of Shakespeare, although did enjoy Macbeth, calling it
a most excellent play in all respects.
One of the other striking things about his many accounts of his visits to the theatre in the 1600s is that the verb he often uses to describe how one experienced a play is heard. On Romeo and Juliet,
"It is a play of itself the worst that I have ever heard in my life."
Told you he wasn't a fan of the bard. Although Pepys also writes about seeing plays, there is something interesting about the idea that the play was fundamentally the ideas and words which could be taken in and appreciated, or not, without the need for lavish spectacle. Whilst we might talk about listening to radio plays and audiobooks, going to the theatre is pretty firmly regarded as a multi-sensory experience these days. The majority of West End shows offer their audiences impressive sets, eye-catching costumes, and sometimes incredible special effects. The play is still the thing, but how well the show creates its world for an audience, in sound and vision, has become just as important to a lot of theatregoers. So it's always interesting to experience plays by writers and directors who have chosen to go in the opposite direction and to deliberately strip back the staging of their work to its essential parts. Since the early part of the 20th century, theatre practitioners have experimented with plays that don't conform to conventional structure, settings, or content. More recently, playwrights like Caryl Churchill, Martin Crimp, Sarah Kane, and others have written plays that do not specify anything about how they should be staged and use them to encapsulate ideas that resist a naturalistic approach. Caryl Churchill's play A Number, first performed in 2002, has no stage directions and gives no indication of the setting for the play. The original production at the Royal Court Theatre in London used 2 chairs on an otherwise bare stage. Costume was simple and modern. The simplicity of the staging was deliberately juxtaposed with the complex ideas about cloning, identity, and father-son relationships which the play explores. Another way to keep it simple on stage is to take a classic play or narrative and strip it back to its bones with a minimalist staging. The director Ivo van Hove has taken this approach to classic modern dramas, such as Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge, to great critical and audience acclaim. In 2019, Martin Crimp's version of Cyrano de Bergerac rebooted Rostand's classic play and deconstructed it. Directed by Jamie Lloyd at the Playhouse, the staging had the cast in modern dress, lined up across the stage using handheld and stand microphones. James McAvoy, who played Cyrano, did not sport a large nose. So, apart from keeping costs and the demands on the theatre's design team down, what can be gained from this approach? It brings the language of the text to the fore and can make the playwright's ideas and the issues that the play explores more visible to an audience. It puts the acting front and centre, keeping the focus firmly on the characters and their relationships. This can also mean, for an actor, that there's quite literally nowhere to hide. Sometimes the lack of artifice is the point. Sometimes it can remind us how incredible the human imagination is at filling in the gaps, where a location, prop, or costume is left blank. And maybe, just maybe, it brings us back a little closer to Shakespeare's maxim that the play's the thing.
Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify, Google or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including A Number and Swallow, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media. Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. It's presented by Laura East, John O'Neill and Luke Plimmer, with research by Liz Plumpton. The music is by Brendan Stanley. The podcast is edited by Kevin Middleton.